No one remembered when the beast first appeared on the battlefield. All they knew was that once she arrived, nothing survived. Entire battalions vanished in blood and snow, their weapons shattered, their bodies torn apart by claws and steel. Her face was marked with blood and rage, and her eyes glowed like fire through the storm. She was no animal, and no ordinary soldier. Her body was a blend of warrior and wild. She moved like a predator and struck like thunder. Two massive axes danced in her hands, both soaked red. No one had ever seen a creature like her and lived to describe it. The commanders from both sides gave her a name in their reports, the Unstoppable. They believed she was some failed experiment from a death world, a rogue weapon that no one could claim. But the truth was, no one knew where she came from, or who had built her armor from bare hide and steel. Scouts were sent to track her, but only screams returned. Satellites tried to follow her heat trail, but it always vanished in the snow. She didn't fight for anyone. She appeared in chaos and left only silence behind. Even the cold feared her breath. Until one day, the beast wandered into Sector 9, a small outpost where no major army remained. It was a quiet place, far from the war zones. Only a few medics, engineers, and one stubborn human technician stayed behind to salvage what was left. That human's name was Jason. He wasn't a soldier or a scientist, just a maintenance guy who knew how to fix broken drones and cracked helmets. When others ran, he stayed. He didn't believe in legends. He didn't believe in monsters. Not until he saw her with his own eyes. She didn't charge at him. She didn't roar. She stood at the edge of the outpost's wall, covered in blood, her chest rising and falling with each heavy breath. Her twin axes were clenched tight. Her face was torn between fury and exhaustion. Jason didn't raise a weapon. He didn't call for help. He simply stared, then stepped forward slowly. The others screamed at him to run, but he didn't listen. Something in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't madness. It was pain. The beast lifted one axe, then hesitated. Her ears twitched. Her breathing changed. No one had ever seen her pause before, not even in front of tanks. But here she stood, unmoving, as a single unarmed human walked toward her with empty hands. Jason looked at her face painted like a tiger, but beneath the blood and the fury, there was something else. He said nothing clever, no speech, no threat. Only one word left his lips. "You okay?" She didn't understand his language, but the sound was soft. It wasn't fear, it wasn't command. It wasn't battle. That confused her more than any army had ever done. He offered her food, real food. Not rations or nutrient packs, just warm stew from a tin bowl. She didn't take it, but she didn't kill him either. And that was the first time anyone had ever lived after standing within her reach. The engineers watched from the bunkers, weapons aimed but trembling. "Is he mad?" one whispered. "He's talking to a beast," another answered. "That's no beast. She's listening." Jason didn't flinch when she growled. He simply sat down by the fire and placed another bowl nearby. For 5 minutes, she stood still. Then she moved, slowly, carefully. Her axes dropped into the snow. And she sat beside him. Not a word was spoken, not a threat was exchanged. But everyone who saw it remembered that night forever. It was the night the Unstoppable stopped. It was the night the beast looked like someone who had once been something more, something lost in the storm and steel. And all because a human gave her something no one else dared offer, a name asterisk. The next morning, snow covered the battlefield like a white shroud. Jason opened his eyes to find the beast still sitting near the fire. She hadn't moved much. Her axes were still on the ground, resting against the frost. She watched him with half-closed eyes. Not like a predator watching prey, but like a tired guard unsure what to do next. Her muscles were tense, but not hostile. She looked as if she hadn't slept in years. Jason didn't ask questions. He handed her a mug of hot water mixed with sugar and sat down without a word. He didn't want to break whatever fragile peace had settled between them. The others in the outpost were still scared. Some wanted to run. Some wanted to call for reinforcements. But no one moved. They all knew that one wrong step could bring back the storm. Jason tapped his wrist scanner and opened an old translation app. He showed her a symbol on the screen, a circle with a slash. "No fight," he said, pointing at the camp, then at himself. "Safe." She didn't respond, but she blinked slowly and nodded once. He tried another word, tapping his chest. "Jason." Then he pointed at her and waited. She growled low in her throat, but didn't strike. Instead, she pointed one claw at the snow, then sliced the letter K with her nail. "K?" Jason repeated, confused. But the beast tilted her head and tapped her own chest. It was the first time she gave a hint of understanding. It wasn't a full name, but it was a beginning. Jason smiled and tapped his chest again. "Jason." He pointed to her. "K." She didn't smile, but the growl faded. Her breathing softened. Around them, the outpost held its breath. As the quote meal, around them, the outpost held its breath. Hours passed, she didn't leave. She sat near the fire, always watching. When one of the younger engineers slipped and fell near her, she stood instantly, but did nothing. Her instincts were sharp, but she chose control. Jason began collecting parts from the ruined vehicles nearby. Kay followed him like a silent shadow. When he lifted metal plates, she lifted double the weight. When he carried broken wires, she carried entire frames. Together, they repaired the outer gate. She didn't speak, but her actions were clear. She was helping. Not for reward, not for safety. Maybe not even for understanding. Just because Jason treated her like something more than a monster. Later that evening, Jason gave her a datapad with old images, paintings of warriors from Earth's history. Vikings, samurai, tribal fighters in bearskin cloaks. Her eyes lingered on the images longer than expected. She tapped the screen when she saw one figure standing tall in furs, face painted like a tiger. Jason chuckled and said, "Looks like you." She didn't growl this time. She pointed again at the letter K and touched her chest. The next moment, alarms went off. A scout drone returned from patrol, half destroyed. It projected a live feed onto the wall. A convoy of mercenaries, armed and dangerous, was heading straight for the outpost. They weren't part of the war. They were scavengers, killers. They hunted wounded outposts and took everything: tech, supplies, and lives. Jason looked at Kay. She was already standing. She lifted her axes from the snow. Her expression changed. The softness vanished. The beast returned. But this time, she turned her head slightly toward Jason and nodded. "Let her go," Jason said to the frightened team. "If anyone can stop them, it's her." No one argued. No one dared. She walked out of the gates like a force of nature. Silent but burning inside. Outside, the wind picked up. The snow danced like angry spirits. Kay vanished into the storm. For a moment, all was quiet. Then came the sound: metal crashing, engines exploding, and one final scream. By the time Jason reached the edge of the outpost, the mercenaries were gone. Broken machines and twisted armor littered the ground. Kay stood alone in the red snow, her axes dripping again. But her breathing was steady, her stance calm. She wasn't wild this time. She looked back at Jason, blood splattered across her chest, and waited. Jason didn't speak, he just nodded. In return, she did something no one expected: she smiled. The days that followed were quiet for the first time in months. No war machines roared in the distance. No distress signals echoed from nearby zones. It was like the storm had paused to watch her breathe. Kay didn't speak, but her presence changed everything. The guards stopped trembling. The engineers returned to work. The outpost, once broken and hopeless, began to live again. She stayed near Jason most of the time. When he moved through wreckage to gather metal, she followed. When he sat to rest, she stood nearby, always alert. She never asked for anything. She simply stayed. At night, Jason noticed she didn't sleep much. Her eyes would scan the tree lines or glare at the stars. He wondered what she was looking for. Maybe enemies, maybe memories, maybe nothing at all. One evening, he handed her a recording device. It was small and worn, covered in scratches. "Try it," he said gently. "Just speak something, anything." She stared at the device, then at him, then placed it down. He didn't push. He knew she wasn't ready. But the next morning, the device blinked. Jason played the message alone. It was short, only one word, but her voice was real. Not a growl, not a roar, just one low, clear word. Kara. Jason didn't say it aloud for hours. He carried it with care, tasting the name silently. It was sharp, wild, and heavy with meaning. She had given him trust, a piece of her identity, something no one else ever got. When he saw her again, he nodded. "Kara," he said quietly. She blinked, but didn't reply. Still, she didn't walk away. That was enough for him. Soon, other outposts began sending signals. Stories of the tiger beast who defended Sector 9 had spread. Survivors from broken camps came in small groups, asking if the rumors were true. They came with fear in their eyes but left with wonder. Kara didn't roar at them. She didn't bare her fangs. She helped carry supplies. She reinforced the gates. She stood watch during storms. To them, she was still dangerous. But to Jason, she was something more. Not just a warrior. Not just a beast. She was a protector. But peace never lasted long. One afternoon, a broken drone fell from the sky, crashing near the outpost. Jason ran to it. Kara was already there, axes ready. The drone blinked once and showed a message. A fleet was coming. Not human. Not from any known faction. Their signal was buried deep, ancient and strange. It used old war codes from a time before. The Council. Whatever they were heading straight toward them. Jason shared the news with the team. "They're not mercenaries," he said. "They're not scavengers. This is something else, and it's big." Kara stood beside the map, arms crossed, silent. One of the medics whispered, "Why are they coming here?" Jason looked at Kara and replied, "I think they're coming for her." Everyone turned to her, and even she didn't deny it. That night, Kara sat alone outside the walls. Jason joined her, sitting quietly. "Are they your creators?" he asked. She didn't answer, but her grip tightened around her axe. Jason placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not theirs anymore. You have a name now." Kara didn't speak, but her tail flicked slightly in the snow. That was the only answer he needed. As the stars moved overhead, the wind grew louder. Kara finally stood and faced the sky. Her eyes glowed again, but this time, they held no rage, only focus. The next battle would not be like the others. This time, she would not fight alone. Jason stood beside her and tapped his chest. "I won't run. Not from them. Not from you." Kara turned, nodded once, and then looked toward the horizon where fire flickered in the dark. They had only one night left before the storm returned. The air was thick with tension as the final night settled over Sector 9. The outpost had never felt smaller, never felt more exposed. Lights flickered across the walls, and weapons were checked again and again. Jason stood on the roof, watching the northern skies. He could see distant flashes now. Whatever was coming had engines too large for stealth. The stars vanished behind smoke and flame. Kara crouched beside the fuel tanks, sharpening her axes. Her armor was repaired with scavenged metal plates, but she didn't care for perfection. She was preparing for war, not a parade. Engineers ran cables through the frozen soil. Jason had turned every mining drone into a trap. Explosive charges lined the northern entrance. It wouldn't stop them, but it would slow them down. He passed Kara a headset, pointing at the earpiece. "Try it," he said. She placed it on slowly, not fully trusting the small device. But when the signal clicked in, her ear twitched. Jason's voice came through the feed. "Now we can talk during the fight." Kara grunted softly and nodded. It wasn't much, but it meant something. Communication could mean survival. By midnight, the sky turned blood red. Massive shapes appeared on the horizon. Dark, insect-like. Ships with sharp angles and glowing vents hovered silently. The ground shook as they approached. "They're not just looking for metal," Jason muttered. "They're hunting her." Kara rose to her full height and walked to the center of the gate. The defenders watched her like she was a wall herself. As the first ship landed, a hiss filled the air. From the smoke walked tall creatures with armor like bone and eyes like hot coals. They didn't speak. They simply pointed toward Kara. She stepped forward without fear. Her axes gleamed under the lights. One of the creatures growled in a strange language, and Jason heard a hiss through the translator. One word was clear: return. Kara narrowed her eyes. She tilted her head slightly, then raised one hand and made a slicing motion across her chest. The meaning was clear. No, the creatures moved like a wave, but Kara moved first. She dashed through the smoke, spinning like fire, her axes flashing. The first wave fell before they even raised their weapons. Jason triggered the ground traps. Explosions lit the night, tossing the enemy into the air. Kara didn't flinch. She moved through fire like it was part of her. Jason's team fought from behind the barriers. They used everything: turrets, grenades, flame bursts. But it was Kara who tore through the heart of the invaders. She leapt onto one of the armored beasts and drove her axe deep into its core. Sparks flew. Screams echoed. She didn't stop. She never slowed down. She was fury itself. But then, something changed. A new figure emerged from the largest ship. Taller than the others, wrapped in black steel and gold. Its voice rang through the battlefield, deep and cold. "Kara, designation 014. Return to command, or all will fall." Kara paused, her breath sharp. Jason's voice came through her earpiece. "Ignore it. You're not theirs anymore." She looked back at him, and for a moment, the fire in her eyes burned brighter. The figure stepped forward, holding a long blade charged with red lightning. It pointed at Jason. "Your pet has grown attached to prey." Kara growled low and stepped. Between them, Jason shouted through the cum, "You don't have to fight him alone." But Kara didn't answer. She raised both axes and charged the leader like a thunderstorm. Their clash lit the battlefield. Sparks flew with each strike. Metal cracked, the ground shook. The other invaders backed away, forming a ring around the fight. It was clear this wasn't a battle. It was a test. Kara roared and landed a powerful blow on the leader's shoulder, knocking it to the ground. But he rose again, faster than expected, slicing across her side. Jason screamed her name. "Kara!" She staggered, but didn't fall. Blood poured, but her grip didn't loosen. She wiped the blood from her mouth and kept going. She slammed both axes into the enemy's chest. The armor cracked. The leader dropped to one knee. She leaned forward and whispered something into its ear. Then she drove her claw through its throat. The leader's body hit the frozen ground with a heavy thud. Kara stood over it, chest rising and falling with each breath. Her arms dripped with blood, both hers and theirs. Silence stretched across the battlefield like fog. The invaders froze. Their command was dead, their formation broken. Some dropped their weapons. Others turned to run. Kara raised one axe high and roared, not in anger, but in victory. Jason watched from the wall, speechless. His heart pounded in his chest. He had seen her fight before, but never like this. She wasn't just defending. She was declaring something ancient and powerful. The enemy ships began to rise, retreating into the sky. The invaders scattered, and those who stayed behind were captured by the defenders. The outpost had won, but it had been more than a battle. It had been a message. Kara staggered forward, her steps heavy. Jason leapt down and ran to her. He reached her side just before she collapsed to her knees. Her side was bleeding badly. She refused to show pain, but it was clear she needed help. "Don't move," Jason said as he held her up. "You've done enough. Let me take care of you." She didn't growl. She didn't resist. For the first time, she leaned on him. The medics rushed in. Even though many of them still feared her, they didn't hesitate. They brought stretchers, bandages, and injections. Kara allowed them to touch her. That alone shocked everyone. As she was carried to the medical bay, Jason stayed beside her. He held her hand while her body shivered under the cold steel of the table. Her blood was thick, darker than human blood, but still warm. Hours passed. The medical bay buzzed with movement. No one left her side. They knew she wasn't just some creature now. She had saved all of them. And she had nearly died doing it. Jason stood by the glass, watching her rest. She looked peaceful now, but something about her expression felt empty. Like part of her had been left behind in the snow. When she woke, she didn't speak. But she looked at him and blinked twice. He smiled and said softly, "You're safe now." She stared at him for a long moment, then whispered back, "Jason." It was the first time she said his name. Not through a device, not in mimicry. Her real voice, soft, honest, alive. Jason felt his throat tighten. He sat beside her and said, "You're not a weapon, not anymore. You're free. And you chose us." She didn't reply, but her grip around his wrist tightened. Later, the council contacted the outpost. News of the battle had spread. They wanted a report. They wanted answers. And most of all, they wanted to see the beast for themselves. Jason refused. "She's not a specimen. She's not a prisoner. She's one of us." The officers didn't like that. But they couldn't argue with the results. The outpost had survived because of her. When Kara stood again, she walked with a limp. Her armor was gone, replaced by a robe made of stitched bear fur and fabric from the outpost storage. Still, she looked strong. She walked through the halls, and every eye turned. No one laughed, no one mocked. They bowed their heads with respect. The same people who had feared her now stepped aside to make way. Jason built her a space of her own beside the barracks. It wasn't large, but it had heat, tools, and a fire pit. She didn't say much when she saw it. Just walked in and sat by the fire. She took a piece of metal and began carving, not with a weapon. With a small blade Jason gave her. Her claws were still sharp, but she chose the tool instead. When Jason asked what she was making, she said only one word, symbol. He let her be. He knew it would mean more when she finished. That night, snow fell again. But this time, it felt different, peaceful, like something had changed in the air. Jason walked outside and saw Kara standing beneath the stars. Her eyes were soft. Her voice was quiet. "They'll come again," she said. Jason nodded and replied, "Then we'll face them together." Asterisk over the next few weeks, the outpost transformed. What was once a cold, forgotten ruin now buzzed with fresh life. More survivors arrived, drawn by the tale of the beast who guarded Sector 9. Kara became a silent symbol of hope. She never made speeches or demanded praise. She trained in silence, repaired armor with her claws, and stood watch long after others had gone to sleep. She still didn't speak much. But the few words she did say carried weight. When she said, "safe," people believed her. When she said, "danger," they prepared. Jason worked beside her every day. He helped upgrade defenses, added new radar systems, and even taught her how to fly a small scout drone. She didn't like flying, but she listened. One morning, she carved a new mark into the wall of her hut. It was a curved line, split by a strike through the center. When Jason asked what it meant, she replied, "My choice." The council sent word again. This time, not with threats or orders, but with an offer. They wanted her to join their elite defense division. They called her a hero. They offered medals, recognition, and power. Kara listened to the message without blinking. When it ended, she turned to Jason and asked, "Will I belong to them?" Jason shook his head and said, "Only if you want to. You belong to yourself." Now she didn't reply. But later that day, she walked into the communication room, recorded one word, and sent it back to the council. That word was no. Jason laughed when he heard it. That's the most powerful message they'll ever get. Kara tilted her head and allowed a faint grin to appear across her face. The peace didn't last much longer. A signal came in. From a nearby sector, another unknown force had landed. This one was larger, more coordinated. They moved with purpose and precision. Recon footage showed machines that matched the design of Kara's original enemies, but they were older, twisted by something else. Their armor glowed red like molten glass. Their weapons pulsed like they were alive. Jason and Kara watched the feed together. "They're not just looking for war," he said. "They're looking for you." Kara didn't answer. She just stared at the screen until the final frame froze. She stood, grabbed her axes, and walked outside. Jason followed her to the training field. "You don't have to face this alone," he said. She turned toward him and replied, "I know, that single answer meant more than any oath. It meant trust. It meant unity. It meant she had chosen this place, these people, and him." The defenders prepared as best they could. The new arrivals weren't just soldiers. They were machines built for extermination. Kara knew their kind. She had escaped from their kind. That night, Jason found her sitting by the fire with her head lowered. "Are you scared?" he asked. She didn't move. "Yes," she whispered. "But not for me." He sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll protect each other. That's what people do." She didn't reply, but she reached out and held his hand tightly. When dawn came, the sky turned dark again. Not from clouds, but from the shadows of incoming ships. This army didn't wait to speak. They opened fire before their landing gear touched the ground. The ground exploded in waves. Towers shook, walls cracked. But Kara stood tall, her twin, axes spinning to life. She roared not as a beast, but as a guardian. Jason fought beside her. He used turrets, drones, and explosives. Every time she fell back, he covered her. Every time he was pinned, she broke through the line. Together, they pushed through the fire, carving a path through machines twice their size. Kara's cloak burned, her arms bled, but her spirit never cracked. She reached the command mech in the center of the battlefield. Its core pulsed red, guarded by steel beasts and charged blades. Kara leapt onto its chest and began tearing through the armor. Jason screamed through the headset, "Pull back! It's going critical!" But Kara kept going. Her eyes burned with fury, and her hands moved faster than lightning. With one final strike, she ripped the core from its body and hurled it into the snow. The machine collapsed, sparks dying in the ice around her. The battlefield went quiet as the command mech's body collapsed into the snow. Sparks sizzled and metal hissed as Kara stood over the wreckage. Her shoulders rose and fell with heavy breath. Jason sprinted to her, dodging debris and ducking under fallen girders. When he reached her side, she didn't speak. She dropped her axes and fell into his arms. He held her tight, not caring that she was covered in blood and ash. "It's over," he whispered. "We made it." Her eyes fluttered open, and for once, she allowed herself to lean into him. Rescue teams began to sweep the area. Survivors were pulled from collapsed bunkers. Drones scanned the wreckage, searching for signals. No more enemies remained. The field belonged to them now. Jason guided Kara back to the outpost. Her steps were slow. Every muscle in her body ached. She had given everything to stop the machines. And yet, she didn't complain. The medical team rushed her into the clinic. Again, this time they weren't scared. They worked fast, patching wounds and stabilizing her vitals. They treated her like one of their own. Jason waited outside the door, pacing the hallway. Every minute felt like an hour. He couldn't sit still. He had never felt so helpless before. At last, the door opened. One of the medics gave a small smile. "She's alive, she's strong, she just needs rest." Jason nodded and stepped inside. Kara was lying on the bed, her eyes half open. When she saw him, she didn't smile, but her hand reached out. He took it without a word. "You stayed," she whispered. Jason nodded, "Always." She closed her eyes again and drifted into sleep, her grip still firm around his fingers. Outside the clinic, the camp began repairs. The outpost had survived. 2 assaults that should have wiped it from the map. And every soldier knew why they were still standing. They started calling her something new, not the Beast, not the Unstoppable, but the Guardian of Sector 9. It was a name spoken with pride and respect. Jason didn't care what they called her. To him, she was Kara, just Kara, the one who had chosen her own path, the one who had chosen them. When she recovered enough to stand again, Kara asked Jason to follow her. She took him deep into the snowy woods behind the outpost, where no roads reached and no lights followed. There, in a clearing, she had carved a new symbol into the trunk of a tree. 2 intersecting lines, surrounded by a ring. Jason tilted his head. "What's this?" he asked. Kara looked at him and said, "My home." The word hit him harder than any blast. She wasn't just protecting this place. She had claimed it. This world was hers now. Jason stepped beside her and carved his own mark beneath hers. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. She looked at it, then at him, and for the first time she smiled fully. The next day, a message came from the Galactic Council. Not an order, not a demand, a request. They wanted to meet Kara, not to study her, but to learn from her. Jason read the message aloud to her. Kara listened, then asked one question. "Will they take me away?" Jason shook his head. "Not unless you let them." She stood in silence for a long time. Then she walked back to the clinic and returned with her axes. She set them down in the center of the courtyard for all to see. "I'm done running," she said. "If they want to know who I am, they will meet me here." The outpost cheered, not because of her strength, but because of her choice. For the first time, Kara wasn't fighting for survival. She was fighting for her future, and for the people who gave her a name, Asterisk. The council ships arrived 3 days later. They didn't come with weapons drawn or fleets in formation. Just a single vessel, white and unmarked, drifting slowly above the snowy ridge. Kara stood in the center of the courtyard, arms crossed, cloak fluttering in the wind. Jason stood beside her. No one else spoke. They knew this moment wasn't theirs. To lead, the ramp lowered with a soft hiss. From the fog stepped 3 council envoys, 2 officers and 1 historian. Their uniforms were clean. Their eyes were cautious. The lead envoy bowed. "We are not here to claim. We are here to understand." Kara said nothing. She waited. The silence stretched until the envoy dared to speak again. "We were told you were a weapon," he said. "A thing of war. But what we see is something different." Kara finally moved. She stepped forward and placed one hand on her chest. "I chose," she said. The words were clear, strong, final. The envoy nodded slowly, as if understanding something sacred for the first time. Jason stayed silent, but his heart raced. Kara had stood against monsters, machines, and her own past. Now she stood before the most powerful authority in the galaxy without flinching. The historian approached with a small device. "We would like to record your name for the archives for future generations." Kara looked to Jason once, then stepped forward. She spoke one word. "Kara." The device blinked. Her name now existed in official records, no longer hidden in whispers or warnings. The council did not try to recruit her. They did not ask her to leave. They only asked one thing: that she continue to protect this place. As its guardian, she gave a small nod. It was not a promise to them. It was a promise to herself, to Jason, to the people who had accepted her without fear. The envoys left with bowed heads. Their message was clear. Kara had earned not just their respect, but something far deeper, their awe. Weeks passed. The outpost became a center of training and recovery. Soldiers came not to fight, but to learn. They studied defense, survival, and most of all, unity. Kara taught them in silence. She showed them how to fight, but more importantly, how to choose. She taught them that strength meant nothing without purpose. Jason watched her grow into something legendary. Not through power, but through presence. She had become a living example of transformation. Sometimes she would return to the tree in the woods, carving more symbols. No one else understood them, but Jason did. Each one was a memory, a vow, a piece of her journey. One night while they sat beside the fire, Jason looked over and asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't said anything that day?" Kara stared into the flames and shook her head. "You saw me," she said. "Not what I looked like, who I was. That was enough." Jason didn't respond. He just smiled and handed her a mug of hot tea. She sipped quietly, then rested her head against his shoulder. The fire crackled. The snow drifted. The stars above blinked silently, as if watching the end of an old story and the start of a new one. The beast was never tamed, because she was never truly wild. She was simply alone, waiting for someone to see her. And when that someone gave her a name, the galaxy changed.